Hey everybody, I'm Bob Birch and this is the Working Differently in Extension podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I'm looking forward to our conversation that's going to center around a commentary that was in the last issue of the Journal of Extension called Envisioning New Roles for Land-Grant University Extension, Lessons Learned from Climate Change Outreach in the Midwest. And the authors of that commentary are with us today. I'd like to welcome them. Linda Prokopy is a professor in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at Purdue University. Welcome, Linda.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
And Rebecca Powers, the director of the North Central Region Water Network at the University of Wisconsin Extension in Madison. Rebecca, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So I want to set the stage a little bit here about sort of why the survey was done about climate change and extension, and it sort of starts with the useful to usable project. So, Linda, can you explain what that project is for us?
Sure. The useful to usable project, which we call U2U for short, is a consortium of 9 different universities across the Midwest. We were funded by USDA NIFA almost 5 years ago with a $5 million grant to develop climate information for agricultural producers, specifically corn producers in the Midwest, to help them adapt to increasingly variable climate. And we've been working together, like I said, now for over 4.5 years. And part of that work included surveying lots of different people in the agricultural sector to understand what their current uses of climate information were, what their interests might be, et cetera, so that we could develop tools that actually stood a chance of being used.
So, Linda brought up the survey, Rebecca, and really the commentary that you guys wrote really centers, I think, on some of the results of the survey. What were the things in the survey that surprised you, or if there were any?
I don't think there was really much of anything that surprised me. I think for those of us that are working in an extension, we're in the field with educators and we're on campus. I think the findings were pretty consistent with what we're seeing in the relationships between specialists and educators, and it's certainly understandable. So, Extension's role is one of Extension's roles is to be a two-way conduit of information and to try to translate what we're hearing from university researchers and what we're hearing from out in the field with the diversity of audiences that we work with, trying to knit those two things together. And sometimes in our current conversational climate, that knitting takes some time. And so I think the survey results are consistent with that.
Linda, maybe I should go back a little bit too, as I maybe pushed us a little ahead a little bit faster than we need to, because it wasn't just farmers and extension personnel who were part of the survey. There were other groups as well. Can you talk about those and sort of how you categorize them?
Sure. So we surveyed farmers, of course, across the Midwest, and we did that in collaboration with another USDA NIFA-funded project, and we surveyed over 19,000 farmers. And then we surveyed what we're broadly calling agricultural advisors. And this is a group that hasn't really been studied before, and I think we're really innovating, trying to understand that group. So we tend to think about extension as the main vehicle for communicating with farmers, but there's actually this whole giant group of other people out there working with farmers. There are certified crop advisors, bankers, soil and water conservation district staff, lawyers, journalists, all sorts of folks out there. And what we tried to do in 4 of our states, because this was quite an undertaking, so we didn't try and do it in every state, but we did it in 4 of our states, we gathered lists of all those different types of advisors, and we surveyed those folks about their needs and interests. And then we also surveyed extension as a special type, an important type of advisor across the entire 12-state region that we're working in. And we surveyed members of our team. So we surveyed members of our actual science team, and we surveyed members of another team also working on climate and agriculture in the Midwest to see what the scientists who are working on these issues think compared to extension, compared to advisors, compared to the actual farmers.
So just for the folks who are listening, and you guys know who you are, who are really into this part of it, can you talk a little bit about the response rate among things, maybe how, your process a little bit of taking that data?
Sure, I could talk for hours about nerdy things like response rates. Don't get me started.
We're going to do that for everybody else in the audience. We're going to do that briefly, so stay tuned.
Briefly, okay, all right. So the farmer survey we did, NAS, the National Ag Statistics Service, sent out the farmer survey for us, and we got about a 26% response rate, which I do farmer surveys. That's most of what I do, and so that's not a great response rate. But what we were able to do, NAS gave us ag census data for all of our respondents and our non-respondents. And so we were able to show that our respondents were actually quite like our non-respondents. So we weren't very worried about non-response bias. Our advisor surveys, our response rate, I'd have to look at the table to tell you, but it was quite low. I think it was in the 20s. But a lot of the advisors, we didn't know, sending to advisors in advance, if they even advised corn farmers. And we had a screening question in our survey for that I think a lot of folks just, they got the email from us saying, please take our survey, and they said, well, I don't work with corn farmers, and they probably deleted it. So our response rate is probably, our true response rate is probably higher than it looks. And again, that's a group that's never been surveyed, so any information we got was new information, and I think very helpful to us. And then, of course, extension, I really feel like I should know these numbers. What was our extension response rate? Isn't in this table I'm looking at. Our extension rate was higher than the other advisors, but it wasn't. I think it was probably about 50%. It was not. It certainly wasn't 100%. As you know, extension staff are inundated with surveys constantly, and so I think it's quite hard to get. And they're very, very busy, so it's quite hard to get responses there. And then our scientist groups, of course, we had good responses because they're sort of a captive audience working with us on the project. So
I want to get to the findings because I think, obviously your commentary has some recommendations, and it's based on some of the key things that were pulled out of there. And I'm gonna do it in a little bit of different order than you guys did in the article, and sort of save the for those of you who've read the commentary. This is not a spoiler or anything, but I want to save this key question about how extension educators believe, whether they believe in anthropogenic climate change for a second, and talk a little bit about about the advisors and the influence that they have on farmers. So, Rebecca, can you talk about that a little bit? I think sometimes, and I do some work in communication, and a lot of times we ask people to talk about, ask them who their target audience is, and invariably in extension, I've had people tell me it's always the end user. And I think what the findings here might point to something else in some situations.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the fact that these results point to a little bit different answer, and I think that my experience is that most states already understand that, most extension programs understand that and are doing that in some part of their program. So I think, but having data like this helps inform the entirety of an extension program. Yes, are we moving in the right direction? Do we want to shift our approach a little bit more? We say here, this is just another reason to emphasize programming that we do with a diversity of advisors, as Linda said. There's a train-the-trainer approach here. So, but we also, our programming already takes care, looks for economies of scale, where we're bringing large groups of producers together in regional meetings rather than as much of the one-on-one on-farm programming that I think used to be more common in extension. So, and all of these approaches I think are still needed. It just, again, there's some evidence here. Well, and one of the findings that I'm sure we were all pleased to see is the high level of trust that people have for extension as a provider of information. And so that, again, so even if advisors, there are more advisors on farm now than there are extension educators, those advisors are still looking to extension for the science and looking to land-grant universities for the science. So it's this relationship, I think, that Linda and I wanted to highlight. And maybe this is for a future part of the conversation, but we do talk a little bit about how to strengthen that relationship between scientists and extension educators that have more 80 to 100% kind of extension appointment, and the criticality of that, given the part of our extension brand. What makes us unique is that science that people like Linda and our agronomists, our soil scientists, our hydrologists, that those folks are producing. That information is something that we really have on our side as a translator of information and a provider of information.
Linda, the results about influence and trust, I think, are super interesting, and Rebecca has commented on them about farmers being influenced by crop advisors, and but advisors trusting extension. How did you guys come to the decision to make that delineation? I think maybe some of us would have thought influence is influence.
Right. So I usually in my farmer surveys I use a question that we developed years ago in collaboration with the University of Wisconsin and other states that's focused on trust. So we tend to ask farmers who they trust for information. And in this survey, we asked the influence question, and that was Jay Arbuckle at Iowa State, who we were working with. That's a question he's used before. And so we asked the influence question. And when we asked farmers who they trust for information, in pretty much every survey I've ever done about that asked the trust question, the #1 trusted group by farmers is extension. So suddenly when we asked this influence question, and we got a very, very different answer, which I wasn't expecting, because I was just, I hadn't even really thought about the fact we were asking a different question, which is embarrassing to say. But influence and trust are two very, very different things. So while farmers trust extension, they're not as influenced by extension as much as they're influenced by their crop advisors, who they're seeing on a more regular basis. And then when we asked the advisors, in the advisor survey, we asked a trust question, not an influence question. And I honestly don't know 5 years ago why we made that decision, but I'm glad that we did, because I think it's a very interesting story. That while farmers are influenced by these crop advisors, those crop advisors greatly trust extension, especially for information about climate change, which is what I'm sure for all information, but our specific question was about climate change information. So I think it tells a very nice story that gives us some clear direction in how we should be moving forward to actually get information out to the end users.
So Rebecca, you mentioned a little bit about the importance then of deepening these relationships between extension professionals and some of these advisors, given the dynamic here. Did you guys think about specific ways, practical ways that might happen?
So, and just to be clear, I think in every state that I'm, that we work in, there are already strong relationships between extension and agricultural advisors. I mean, a lot of folks in extension are, running themselves ragged this time of year, crisscrossing their states in farmer meetings, or producing, having large meetings for producers. We just got done with the Wisconsin Crop Management Conference here, where we had a little U2U presentation. So that's already occurring. I think where we could have a more substantive conversation is about how those relationships between extension and the university and farm advisors are being utilized to talk about how we incorporate climate information into our education to advisors and our education to farmers, because that that's a place where U2U, I think, has contributed a lot. Not only the social science information, but the decision support tools that were developed and informed by that social science information. So that's not a direct answer to your question, but I do think it's an important conversation for Extension to be having right now, and I think we hope these results inform that conversation. We're in the process now of preparing I don't know if we're calling it a white paper, Linda, or what we're calling it, but a piece that summarizes even more of the research than what we've provided here, and also summarizes some of the experience of extension educators that have participated in UDU and in a different NIFA-funded project, the Sustainable Corn Project, led by Lois Wright Morton out of Iowa State. So we're hoping to add some of those reflections and experiences to this conversation.
Linda, one of the findings that I've sort of teased here if people have seen in the commentary is that land-grant university extension educators don't believe in anthropogenic climate change caused by us, human folks, at the same level as university scientists. And I'm just going to add, Rebecca said she wasn't surprised by anything in there because you guys are working for these. Were you surprised by that?
I was. So I'm not as in touch with extension educators on a daily basis as Rebecca is, but I do have an extension appointment, so I'm 20% extension in my faculty position. And my understanding of extension is that extension's job is to disseminate university-generated science. So if the university-generated science is that climate change is happening, and it's caused by humans, and we need to do something about it, then I would expect our county educators to be believing and propagating that science. Being cautious in how they communicate it, understanding that their end users, their target audience, isn't necessarily fully on board. But I would still expect them there not to be a disconnect between the university science and what the extension educators know and understand. So I was surprised by that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in here for just a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, we've all seen, we know that what comes out of the scientific process is it contributes to the information that we have to make informed decisions. And we know that we're always learning as we go. So in this case, I think there's an overwhelming body of science that indicates where we are with climate change, that climate change is happening, and large components of it are caused by human activities. And I think extension educators are, we need to look across this information supply chain and do it in a clear-eyed and conscious way. And we in extension are part of that conversation, and I think are at a pivot point, a node in the network, and we just institutionally we need to have that conversation and figure out how to serve our constituencies most effectively with the science. So that's where hopefully this conversation is leading.
So Rebecca, do you think that extension services in general, and I mean, you don't have experience maybe with all extension services across the country, but just in terms of your feeling, you think that we are ready as cooperative extension to have that conversation? And the reason I ask is I've been at a land-grant university now for 7 years, and over that 7 years I've seen the language related to climate change be sort of altered, and maybe we talk about extreme weather, or
Mm-hmm.
from the way that the way it has in the general conversation about it as well. So so I'm just going to throw it out there. Is extension ready to take on something that remains controversial, at least in public perception?
I think we're absolutely ready to take that on, and I think the key to that is having these conversations among the scientists that are producing this information, or our climatologists, our agronomists, our social scientists. Having those disciplines come together to inform our educators, and have our educators explain what they're facing in the field, what some of the realities are that they're facing, and come to some consistent understanding of how to communicate the information. I think we're absolutely ready to have that conversation, but there are some good reasons why we use language that like producers have a job to do. They're growing crops. They're producing livestock, and they have specific decision parameters that they need to consider. We need to be able to speak to those how they make decisions, and you produced some good information, some good insights about, okay, what are those specific decisions that are informed by climate information, and the decision support tools, again, are geared that way. If we produce information that is not usable to useful, or, well, it may be useful, but maybe it's not usable because it's not the way they make a decision, that's not a helpful way to have the conversation. So what we're trying to do is bridge what the climatologists are telling us, what the soil scientists are telling us, and what producers need to make more informed, effective decisions. And that's really, so I don't think we should be afraid of the climate conversation. We're just trying to be the best educators possible. I think we have, in some cases, been afraid of the climate conversation, and I think we're ready to get past that.
Linda, one of the recommendations in the commentary is that there needs to be more ongoing communication between the researchers and the extension educators. Why did you think that would help, in terms of addressing the survey results and the disconnect there?
The disconnect suggested to me that we're not doing a good job on campus of getting out and talking to our extension educators about what's going on, since our educators are much more like the farmers they're working with in terms of their climate change beliefs than the university folks. And I know in my own position that I don't interact very much with extension educators. There are certainly meetings where extension educators get together, but researchers aren't invited to those meetings, or they're not really necessarily strongly on the agenda. And so I expect that this actually exists even beyond climate change, right? That we're not doing a very good job getting that university science down to the level of extension educators. And that's in broad, gross, general terms, right? Because there are certainly extension specialists on campuses who are working very closely with educators, but a lot of those extension specialists are not climate change scientists. The climate change scientists don't tend to have extension appointments, and we don't have a good mechanism for having that communication in an ongoing way.
So one of the things that that you guys suggest, Rebecca, is having an institutional commitment to this, and obviously leadership's always important in any kind of change that we're trying to institute in our organization. Why do you think in this case, suggesting that there's a reward system tied to this and those kinds of things, why do you think it was so important to kind of go that step in increasing this communication? Yeah,
well, so this is not a new idea that Lynn and I have proposed here. This idea has been around for a long time, and I think the conversation actually goes on in our institutions regularly. So again, just to be clear that a lot of these, the data is new, a lot of the ideas are not new. I think we're just reinforcing these ideas with this new data and related to a particular issue, climate and agricultural education. I direct the North Central Region Water Network. We're an extension-led network, and we take very seriously, bringing in our colleagues that are doing research that don't have extension appointments, and figuring out how to strengthen those ties. And these reward systems are clearly one. So how, what are you rewarded for in tenure? Whether you're an extension educator, frankly, and you're in a tenured system, or whether you're in a campus-based department. So those, sometimes, in extension, we feel like we've got 10 different jobs to do. And same thing with faculty, that could have a two-way appointment with research and extension, or a three-way appointment with research and teaching and extension. And if we're going to be engaged universities, if we're going to be timely and relevant, and all those things, if we're going to be having an impact, our reward systems need to not just promote, not just look at the impact that a journal article is having, but the other things that we're doing to actually have that information apply on the ground. So, long answer, but I think that's why it's important. Is ultimately we want this research to make a difference in the world, and I think we can those reward systems, tweaking those reward systems, could be a big help in having that occur.
Rebecca, I'm going to come back to you and just ask a little bit about, as some of the research we've seen, especially as it relates to long-held or personal beliefs and the ability to change those, and some of the research that's been done on that over the last few years, especially on social media conversations and those kinds of things. Can you actually change someone's mind? And how difficult that suggests that is. Because of that, I'm going to ask this question. Do you think it's possible for extension educators to do what is required of them in terms of informing their constituents about climate and how it affects their operation without believing in anthropogenic climate change?
That's a good question. So Linda probably knows more about the science of belief change than I do. So I'm a little bit cautious about that in terms of my own knowledge of that literature. I can speak to my own experience, and what I've seen is that relationships are critical, and the way that information is framed is critical. And speaking to people's values and what they care about is possible in this situation. Forgive me. So I definitely think it's possible to have those conversations with extension educators and researchers. I don't think we're that far off many times in terms of our ability to serve our constituencies effectively. And again, I think the UDU project demonstrates that, and we're looking forward to carrying on with UDU work after the project ends.
Linda, I'm sort of leaving the mic open in case you want to jump in on that at all.
No, I agree. I agree with what Rebecca said. I mean, it is very, very hard to change people's fundamental beliefs. Worldviews is another way that's framed in the current literature. So that is a struggle, but I think we need to keep that communication needs to be open so that we can try and change. People need to believe the science, right? So we need to keep working on that.
So, Linda, I just want to wrap up with one other question, and that is, you guys start your commentary with talking about how important it is that extension do this work, and so and about the consequences potentially for agriculture. So, can you touch on that a little bit about what producers may face if they don't come to terms with the changing climate?
Well, we definitely know that across the Midwest, as the climate changes, we're going to see more and more extreme events. We're going to see a lot more concentrated rain events. So I think the science, I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't want to be quoted on this. Well, I am, because I'm live on air, but so I guess you can quote me. But we're going to see, we might not see more rain necessarily over the period of a year, but we'll see a lot more rain concentrated in different events, which we've been seeing in recent years where we have more flooding, et cetera. And so as farmers don't believe that's going to happen and don't take actions, we're going to see more issues with more nutrient runoff when we have more extreme rains, which could have been prevented with just more, just different, just applying split application throughout the year versus applying all at once in the spring. So I think it's those types of things. We just want people to be more aware of the fact that these things are changing and that there are ways that they can adapt to have a more resilient farm, both in the short term. So, thinking about doing split application is a very short-term decision. That's not a long-term climate change adaptation. That's just adapting to the fact that things are becoming more variable. and the science suggests that that variability is due to climate change. But over the long term, there are other types of questions and thoughts we'd want farmers to start having, right? Which is what crops should I even be growing? What's the right thing to be doing on this landscape over the next 10, 20, 30 years as the climate continues to change? And our project, U2, did not grapple with those longer term decisions, but I think that is a conversation that the agricultural community needs to start having.
Rebecca, is there a place that folks can go to find out more about Useful to Usable?
They can go to Ag Climate for You, and agclimateforyou.org, right, Linda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's 4 with a 4, folks. Yeah. The number 4.
4.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're holding up 4 fingers on the video for.
And then a U at the end, just the letter U. So Ag Climate 4, letter U.
Great. I want to thank you guys for just being very open, and I think it was a great conversation, and I appreciate your work in the Journal of Extension. If you want to see the commentary, envisioning new roles for land-grant university extension, lessons learned from climate change outreach in the Midwest, go to the Journal of Extension at www.joe.org. That's J-O-E. Linda Prokopy, and Rebecca Power, thank you so much for joining us on the Working Differently in Extension podcast, and thank you listeners and viewers as well. I want to remind you that you can learn more about Working Differently in Extension by following us on Twitter. It's at WDNEXT, and you can find all the podcasts on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/workingdifferently. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks.